Good afternoon, everyone. It's certainly a pleasure to be here today and participate with a number of distinguished presenting companies today. It's also a great privilege to have an opportunity to discuss the work we're doing at Cardiol as it potentially relates in a very significant way to the challenge we're all facing together, which is this global pandemic associated with COVID-19. I'll just start with a bit of the genesis of Cardiol and where it all began. We have been operating in the area of heart failure medicine for over 30 years. The Cardiol team has been developing important medicines for cardiovascular disease and heart disease for the past 3 decades. And what attracted us to a new innovation and a new approach to the treatment of this deadly disease was a publication that appeared back in 2010 in the Journal of the American College of Cardiology, which is a globally renowned Tier 1 high-impact journal read internationally by cardiologists and widely respected. And this basically demonstrated the ability of cannabidiol, or now well known as CBD, to protect the cardiovascular system. So it's basically a cardioprotective molecule. And this was discovered and developed in a model of diabetes and hypertension, which are 2 of the major factors that drive the leading cause of death and disability in the Western world today, which is heart failure. So this is where the heart fails to pump sufficient blood to oxygenate tissues. So how is this relevant? We obviously did not know this back then, but not a day goes by where we don't read a new media publication about the impact of the most vulnerable, basically the impact of this deadly virus on patients that have a background in cardiovascular risk. So we know that this disease obviously is a cardiopulmonary resuscitatory or respiratory disorder. But what is now becoming increasingly recognized is one of the targets of the attack of this virus is the heart. And when you have elevated risks or a background in cardiovascular disease or high blood pressure or diabetes, you are at significantly higher risk for poor outcomes with this disease and much higher mortality. And this is illustrated by this publication that was just published in JAMA, the Journal of the American Medical Association, in late March. And what you see on the right side, this is a Kaplan-Meier survival curve. So as those lines trend down, mortality is rising or survival is decreasing. And you can see without a prior cardiovascular injury or cardiovascular risk, you have very significant survival, well over 95%. However, in the presence of a prior myocardial injury or cardiac injury, could be a prior heart attack, could be long-term high blood pressure, diabetes, other factors that influence heart disease, you have a very significant mortality rate in the range of 50%. So a background in cardiovascular risk significantly elevates the risk to patients that develop or get COVID-19. And this is also shown on this slide, quite compelling here. With respect to elevated blood markers. So when a COVID-19 patient is diagnosed and they present in the ER, we now know that they're taking blood markers for elevated risk. One of them is troponin levels, which is a marker spilled over into the blood, which is an indicator of cardiovascular risk or trouble with the cardiovascular system. And you can see the bottom, so here we have the y-axis is mortality. So as these lines go up, mortality risk rises. And I'll just compare the lower and the higher one. We basically have, without cardiovascular disease and normal troponin levels, this marker of elevated risk, we have very low mortality rates in about 7% of patients. However, when you go to the upper right and you look at a background in cardiovascular disease plus elevated troponin levels, you have a mortality rate approaching 75%, which is very striking. With this background of cardiovascular risk, you have very significant elevation in mortality risk. So why is that important to Cardiol? It's important to Cardiol because we're developing essentially a cardioprotective agent. This has always been our focus. Our mandate, our mission has always been to overcome the challenges of the leading cause of death and disability in the Western world, which is heart failure, or a failure of the cardiovascular system, which puts high pressure on the heart and causes the heart to basically fail. What we know in terms of this important molecule that we're developing pharmaceutically pure version of, and we're about to commercialize, is that it significantly decreases fibrosis. So fibrosis is a cell death process. It's basically the process by which the heart dies. This molecule has been shown to significantly insulate in experimental models against fibrosis. It reduces important markers of cardiac damage, such as BNP, which are elevated significantly in heart failure patients. It improves the left ventricular function of the heart, so the ability of the heart to function as a pump to either fill with blood or eject and oxygenate tissues of the body. It reduces cardiac inflammatory cytokines. You'll read in the media now, and certainly in the scientific media, that there's this cytokine storm that occurs, which is this massive and systemic inflammatory response caused by the immune system trying to kill the virus that basically causes massive organ failure and death in patients. And importantly, cannabidiol reduces a number of very important pro-inflammatory or inflammatory cytokines. And most importantly, it reduces cardiac injury associated with elevated troponin levels. And if this marker is just ever so slightly elevated in the blood of patients, we know those patients have a much higher risk than otherwise, to the extent that it is not elevated. And we really need to take extra special care of those patients. So with all of this as a background, we believe this agent has significant potential in the treatment or the cardioprotection against one of the primary targets of this deadly virus, which is the cardiovascular system. So at Cardiol, we have three important programs. We've developed the most sophisticated form of cannabidiol in the world with the highest level of purity and stability. We see a potential to generate significant revenues to offset our development costs and generate profitable revenues as we develop high-value biotech assets. We've just recently signed an exclusive national distribution agreement with who we believe is the most important distributor of medicinal cannabinoid treatments in the country, which is Shoppers Drug Mart, obviously a widely recognized, trusted brand in pharmacy distribution, because we are focused exclusively and specifically on medical use of this important molecule. We also have a very important program being initiated at leading cardiac centers around the world in acute myocarditis. That's basically a big medical term for inflammatory heart failure. And you're going to hear a lot more about myocarditis because myocarditis is now a significant new cause, or COVID-19 is now a significant new cause of myocarditis, and it's leading to death in these patients. And then we have a program addressing a mass market opportunity that we plan to partner with the multinational pharmaceutical company specializing in cardiovascular disease, which is targeting heart failure, where we've innovated an entirely new way to deliver this important molecule in a highly strategic way, in a highly targeted way, directly at failing heart tissue. All of our developments are supported by global partnerships. We have exclusive partnerships with two of the key players for the supply of our medicines. Dalton Pharmaceuticals is an organization I've worked with for over 25 years in my prior heart failure company, and again now with Cardiol. The owner, founder, and CEO of Dalton Pharmaceuticals is a shareholder and serves on our board of directors. And they have an extensive expertise in formulating medicinal cannabinoid formulations. And we also have the largest supplier in the world as a partner for medicinal cannabinoids at 100% purity to supply the Dalton formulation program to provide access to the global markets. So the key advantages of our formulation is its stability, its purity, its manufacturing standard, the fact that this provides reproducible dosing for patients irrespective of what they're using this treatment for. And most importantly, we have engineered this formulation to be THC free. So there's no psychoactive component, there's no addictive component. This can be used in an elderly population without risk of intoxication. And more importantly, To the extent that it's being used in a pediatric population, we know that THC has an impact. We don't fully understand its impact on the developing brain. So much so that the Pediatric Society of Canada and the Royal College of Physicians, which govern the practice of all physicians in the province of Ontario, they mandate that physicians not prescribe THC to anyone under the age of 25. So we basically have developed a program for the fastest growing segments of this marketplace. And to give you some context as to how our product is profiled, I would just suggest to you that the product Epidiolex, which has been approved by the FDA for the treatment of epilepsy, developed by a New York Stock Exchange multi-billion-dollar company, if you look at our product relative to that product, it's essentially identical. It's the same amount of drug, same consistency, same purity. It's an oral formulation. It's manufactured to the same standard. But we actually have a lower level of the psychoactive component THC. We have the lowest in the world. And that's important when we're dealing with either a pediatric population or a population that may have risk for intoxication or drug side effects. And possibly in the case of a cardiovascular risk population that we're developing it for, we know that THC levels can influence arrhythmic disturbances in the heart and may have adverse effects in a high-risk population. So we have aligned ourselves with the most dominant brand in prescription cannabinoids in the country and prescription medicine in general. This is a nationwide distribution network through Shoppers Drug Mart. They have a brand that patients know and trust. They have an alliance with a very efficient mechanism for patients to obtain an authorization or a prescription for this medicine. And most importantly, they're pharmacy and medically focused, which is exactly why we've developed our brand and positioned it as a medically focused brand. And the revenue opportunity we see commencing imminently is in the fastest growing segments of this market, which include pediatrics, where pediatricians well know that this molecule influences seizure disorders. But more importantly, we see this vast market opportunity, which is now $1.2 billion in the Canadian market for pain management, inflammation, anxiety. And of course, we all know that we're living in an anxiety-riddled world. And that's leading to a real drive for this medicine. And then the fastest growing segment in this marketplace is people over the age of 65, where THC can lead to intoxication effects. What we really want to talk about today is in the context of this COVID nightmare, is the impact on the cardiovascular system and its ability to protect. So we have a program in acute myocarditis, which is a major cause of sudden cardiac death in young people. A lot of people think about heart disease as a disease of the elderly. Myocarditis does not discriminate. Myocarditis takes the lives of young people. It's the leading cause of sudden cardiac death in people under the age of 30. This phenomena and the risk profile is also being exacerbated now by the COVID-19, which now represents a significant new cause of myocarditis-related mortality. And this slide just illustrates the impact of cannabidiol and its ability to protect against this insidious insult on the heart. Myocarditis has always been caused by a virus, primarily, where a virus such as the influenza virus and now the COVID virus becomes resident in the heart, and our immune systems try to kill that virus and overreact and end up killing cardiac tissue. This is illustrated on the right side. The top panel is healthy tissue. The middle panel is fibrous tissue being assaulted by the immune system and dying. And the bottom right panel shows the ability in the presence of myocarditis for cannabidiol to protect that tissue. And we're partnered and collaborating with globally renowned centers, including the Ottawa Heart Institute, world-renowned for its work in myocarditis and heart failure in general, the Mayo Clinic in the United States and other major centers in the US, and the Charité in Berlin, which is one of the largest myocarditis practices in all of Europe. And then with respect to our larger program, we're also looking at heart failure, which by any measure is a major medical challenge. It remains the leading cause of death and disability in the Western world. It's driven by diabetes, obesity, and high blood pressure, and all those factors are on the rise. And basically what happens, you get a fibrous thickening in the chambers of the heart, and the heart simply can't function properly. You get fluid retention, and patients feel like they're suffocating. We worked with the Nanotech Institute of the University of Alberta to design an entirely new way to deliver this important molecule to the drug or to the heart by basically disguising it as a smart treatment, as a water-soluble chemical, so it could last in the body much longer. And this was demonstrated at the world-leading DeBakey Heart Center, where the first heart transplant was ever performed in the United States. They induce heart failure by inducing high blood pressure. And we know that high blood pressure causes strain on the heart becomes enlarged and inflamed. So we encapsulated the drug, we introduced it into this model system. And interestingly, when we put a fluorescent tag on it, the glowing nanostructures that we were introducing this active agent through only appeared in the dying heart tissue. So it's specifically targeting the site of disease. And this is illustrated on electron microscopy, where in the bottom right panel, I'll draw your attention to it, those red dots within the blue spindle-shaped cells are our nanostructures carrying drug. And the blue cells are the fibrotic cells, which are the cells which cause cell death in the heart. So essentially, we're transporting a very important medicine directly to the site of disease. We presented this to a globally renowned panel made up of an international collaboration of MIT, University of Calgary, DeBakey Heart Center, and a world-renowned center in Latin America. And they agreed to sponsor our program with $3 million worth of funding, which has now developed what we believe to be the most sophisticated way to deliver this important molecule in its pure form in the world today.
Sorry to interrupt you, David. We actually don't have any time for questions, so I see a couple here that we'll pose to you in the panel.
Yeah.
But I really appreciate you taking the time to walk us through what you're doing. I think it's really important. And thank you for your time.
Okay.
As I mentioned, David will be in the panel this afternoon, treatments and testing. I believe it's at 3:40. So if you have further questions, please participate in that panel, and thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.